So in this episode, I'll be talking to my instructor, mentor, good friend, Steve Kirkman. Over a brew, we'll be discussing his diving as a soldier, an officer, and as an instructor, the risks, rewards, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. So, do you fancy a brew? Steve learned to dive over 20 years ago through the military and has progressed through the BSAC training syllabus, not only to an advanced diver level, but an open water instructor, and through the military, a sub-aqua diving supervisor. He now lives out in Fuerteventura, and amongst his day-to-day job in the oil and gas industry, he works as a technical instructor for TDI, teaching side mounted technical diving, as well as following his own path on his brand new SF2 closed circuit rebreather. So grab yourself a brew, sit back and enjoy. You look like you're in an old person's chair. You're looking good.
No, I'm fat on my bed.
Yeah, what a headboard.
Yeah, well, it's either that or the office. You know what I mean? You know, so I decided to.
Have you got a brew yet?
Brew.
Obviously, we met a few years ago. We met on a training area where I was a stereotypical Lance Jack giving you a bit of lip. You tuned me a right one in, and then a few years later, a chance meeting in the office, we met. And from there, I became a scuba diver, and I think you are fundamental in the way that I dive now. And a lot of my mindset I've taken from you, so thanks very much. Obviously, that's why I wanted you to be the first one, and because we're such good mates, I think we can work on it and make it work, this first one at least. So if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us how you got into diving and whatnot, just a couple of minutes, and then we'll see where the conversation goes.
Okay. Well, obviously you've introduced me already, Steve Kirkman. As a person, you know, I was a young lad, joined the army at age 16. I then did 35 years in the military, both as a soldier and then after that as an officer, and leaving at the age of 50. And now, you know, I'm working in a completely different field. Diving, I started diving actually in 2000. So I'm a relative newcomer in comparison to many. No, but I think it's always fair to say when you've, you know, yeah, okay, it's now 20 years, but I think in comparison to some individuals, I would still class myself as a bit of a newcomer. And not just that, I think a newcomer because I'm still learning an awful lot about the recreational activity of diving, you know, all the time. So I started in 2000. I'd always wanted to dive, and if it sounds kind of cheesy, yes, I was the young lad watching the Jacques Cousteau movies many years ago. You know, in the living room with my dad and my brother. And that was initially where the inspiration to want to dive came from. I joined the armed forces, and despite trying multiple times to get on the courses, it was just impossible. And chance had it that in the year 2000, my brother had started up his own diving school, having emigrated to Australia to start up the business with a close friend of his. And I went across there simply on a holiday just to see him, see how he was getting on. He taught me to dive. And if I use effectively a statement that he said the night before to my wife and said, you do realise that the moment Steve has been in the water tomorrow morning, that's it, he will be hooked and it's going to cost you a fortune. Yeah. Right. Of course, I heard that in the background and I said, no, I won't. I'll just do holiday diving. And I'll join a club and I won't bother buying any kit. And 6 weeks later, I bought my full set of diving equipment. I had it shipped over from Australia on the fly. Wow. And I got found out when the postal card arrived at the doorstep, and my wife said, "Funny enough, I just had a really strange card come through the door today." She says, "You know, from some parcel to pick up from Australia." She says, "You know, I can't understand because we've got nothing coming from Australia, have we?" And there I was busted.
When you said about when you were in the army and you'd always wanted to dive and then courses never come up, you know that I had that same fight with my heads of sheds. The benefits of adventurous training and quite often outweigh the green training sometimes, can't it?
I think quite often the chain of command in the military, and we'll use that because of course the military is fantastic in the fact that it has all of these sporting activities, all of these adventurous training activities that to the general public, they wouldn't quite understand. Why does the army get to go here and there and all this and that? And what on earth has sailing the globe and what on earth has scuba diving got to do with being a soldier? Well, they have to understand effectively what goes on in each activity and how that develops leadership and management outside of being in green skin, as we refer to it as, and using skills and what have you, away from the pressures of being in green skin. And unfortunately, there are still people within that military chain of command look at these adventurous training activities as being a get out, you know what I mean? They're a holiday activity and they don't really serve any purpose and what have you. And I would very strongly disagree, from all the time now that I've been diving as a military dive supervisor, doing expeditions all over the world and organising and participating in them. I think it's a very narrow mind set, if that is the right word, from somebody who thinks that these things don't have any benefits at all, because they do. So where does scuba diving kind of fit into that leadership and management aspect of the military? Well, if you imagine in the armed forces, the military, when you're doing your training, it's very difficult to demonstrate your leadership and management abilities when you're the private soldier on the ground, when effectively you're constantly taking orders from another individual and carrying out and executing those orders. By doing adventurous training and taking somebody out of that military activity and putting them into something like scuba diving, you are effectively putting them into a position where they are able to demonstrate outside of that military environment in a more relaxed atmosphere their own personal leadership and management skills.
Yeah.
And it also then allows through the instructional process like in diving through the Dive Supervisor process, to bring on those leadership and management processes, identify to the individuals where this particular thing that we're doing here, how it relates to the military. I don't think anywhere else within that military environment do you have the opportunity where the most basic soldier, all right, is suddenly leading and managing and supervising and briefing Lieutenant Colonel Farquhar, who just so happens to be his commanding officer.
Yeah.
And that'll be the only time that the commanding officer ever really truly gets a face-to-face with that individual. And it creates good, strong bonds, good relationships, you know what I mean? The individuals get noticed and so on and so on, so I think it's a really worthwhile activity, to have any form of adventurous training in the military. But I think scuba diving in particular lends itself, in my personal opinion, better than many other of the adventurous activities, because right from that very start, from the very basic diver, the BSAC ocean diver, because BSAC happens to be our national governing body and what the military dives to. Those people out there that are listening to this who are BSAC qualified divers will know that effectively as you get to your final open water dive, you are expected to be taking, your instructor or, your buddy pair with the instructor following you, taking them on a dive. So you've given the dive, you've identified the risks. So you've done a dynamic risk assessment of all of the various risks involved in the type of the dive that is you're going to be doing, from depth to time, to decompression management, to air and gas management, and so on and so on and so on. And all of a sudden, that young lad, he's put all that together. He's now briefing, somebody who is either higher qualified, as an advanced diver, say, for example. And the next minute, they're giving you all these briefings, and then they're going off on the dive, they're executing it. They're constantly doing that dynamic risk assessment in the water, all right, against the time, against the gas management. Do they need to cut the dive short because somebody's consuming gas quicker? Do they need to cut the dive short because the currents have changed? So they're constantly doing that dynamic risk assessment as they would do on operations, but they just don't realise it.
Yeah.
And it's not until they come back out and they do the debriefs and they're talking to the dive supervisor and instructor that we then emphasise those and the guys, it clicks together. The next time you see them back at work, and they're now putting all of those skills back into the Green Army side. So it's kind of an embryotic kind of relationship. I think, again, when we're just going back that one step once more about why from that military point of view, is scuba diving, such a good platform, for bringing on leadership and management skills and confidence in people and the wider aspects of risk analysis and and so on and so on. And it's exactly as you just mentioned there, that young soldier from the start, as he's approaching first promotion ladder and he's thinking about his junior NCO's card, where he suddenly gets taught what a set of patrol orders are. Now, if we use the patrol orders, what is the equivalent in diving to patrol orders? Well, first of all, you have the set of orders, all right, and that is the dive supervisor's brief, or in the case of the BSAC club, it's the dive marshal's brief. The dive marshal has done his studying, all right, of the charts, the tides. He's done the weather. He's done, the entry and exit points. He's done the dive site research and everything else that goes with it. And it's and as you know, it's a fairly lengthy list in the dive planning process. So the dive marshal's done all that. Whoever's been designated, within the club to do it. And in the case of the joint services diving, that's always going to be the expedition dive supervisor, all right? And that's all to do with the military side of life and risk and so on and so on, as well as experience and all the rest of it. But once the dive supervisor has given his set of orders, the dive brief, the main brief, right? If you are one of the divers who is now leading your partner, your buddy, you've then got to extract all the information from that big set of orders and put it into a set of bullet points, all right, known as your buddy brief. That's your patrol orders, because that's where you have taken all the information that the dive marshal has said and taken what is relevant to you. Because if you are a sports diver and you can only dive to a maximum depth of 35 meters, but you're going on to a wreck where the first level of the wreck is at 25 meters, all right, and then the second level of the wreck is at 35 meters, but the bottom of the wreck goes down to 50 meters. Well, there's a stepping stone, isn't there? Because those people that are dive leaders can go down to the bottom of the wreck, as long as it's within the dive marshal's plan.
Whereas if and the ocean divers can't even touch it. They can look at it.
Absolutely, you know what I mean. So they're swimming around the mast, what I mean, in circles, looking at the crow's nest. But
hover.
Practicing the hover. Yeah, there's another story. So they've taken that set of patrol orders and then they have to give that as their buddy brief. Well, that's the same as the young lance corporal, all right, issuing his brief, to his section. This is what the plan is. This is what we're taking with us. All right, this is how we're going to execute it. You know what I mean? If this happens, we're going to do this. If that happens, we're going to do that, which we refer to as the actions on. That's all the stuff that we talk about. You know what I mean? In our safety, if we use the BSAC's seeds brief, and as we get through, and within the discipline and all the rest of it, are the things that we do, such as the actions on, and in the event of certain things that we mentioned about the stuff that we've or discuss things or question things in relation to safety aspects. How we, what would we do if we get lost? What happens if we get separated? That is all the same type of things, and people just don't realise it when they're doing that diving course. How much relevance there is when they go back, back to the regiment or battalion.
It's a good comparison in all walks of life, really, isn't it?
It comes apparent to me all the time how people are taking the skills that they learn from diving and moving them across into, the civilian employment or military employment, and vice versa. Because quite often you'll come across, people, within the clubs, who bring a wealth of experience, from outside, from different aspects of management and positions and so on and so on, and they bring other things to the party in the opposite direction as well. I don't think it's any different, Andy, than many other activities. But out of all of the military adventurous training activities that I've done, scuba diving stands out to me as being the one that teaches and develops leadership and management, the ability to conduct dynamic risk assessments, the ability to be able to take information from a set of orders, deliver a set of orders, execute a plan right from the very basics of the qualification, which is the ocean dive level. None of the others do that.
The reason we do adventurous training within the military is to get us over those mental hurdles before we go on operations, isn't it? It puts you on that edge of your own fears and your own sort of your anxieties and that, and tests them and gets you used to them before we go on operations. And then you're used to feeling that emotion. So there is some validity in that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, one of the things that you just mentioned there about, overcoming anxieties and all that type of stuff, I think you've hit the nail on the head a little bit there as well. Now, again, many people will probably have heard, especially through things like, Help for Heroes and so on, because of, the instances that have happened in both Iraq and in particular in Afghanistan, where many of our colleagues came back, unfortunately, having been involved in shootings or explosions and whatever, come back without limbs. And sadly, obviously, those that came, back having lost their lives. But the ones that came back, still alive, but with limbs missing in this, that, and the other, the Battle Back program that was developed by one of the founder members who I knew very, very well, a lad called John Gibbon, who was also a dive supervisor, was instrumental in starting up Battle Back. I don't know whether he was the founder or not, but I know he's instrumental in the start of it, along with another guy who both of us know, Mick Stewart.
Yeah,
were fundamental in developing Battle Back, which was taking guys who had lost limbs and getting them back into the fold, right, through an adventurous training activity, building back their confidence, all right, and making them feel, they have that self-worth and everything again. A hugely successful program. Again, there were many other activities, and we've all seen the ones like where Jeremy Clarkson have used the old Top Gear, where the guys went off and became the rally drivers and all the rest of it. For anybody who's trying to do that, we've all got to take our hats off for anybody who goes in that road, along that road, whether it be helping, people from ex-military, that have been injured, or civilians that have been injured in the line of work, or civilians that have certain elements of stress, PTSD, or whatever it might be, some form of disability that they want to overcome, and they think, diving might be a solution. One never knows until they try it, but, it's been proven already, I think, that it is an excellent medium for helping people do that.
So let's talk a little bit more about you then and diving rather than the sort of the whole military piece. So obviously you learned to dive through your brother in Australia, and obviously he was some big flyer running his own dive show and all the rest of it. So what sort of instigated you to progress up the mountain that is the training programs that we have and to where you are now?
I suppose it all starts, and this is where the first part of, who have been the influencers, in the diving. So my brother, one of the things was with my brother, who was a massive advocate of the BSAC, as am I. He said to me that when I returned back to work in Germany, where I was posted at the time, that I should join one of the military BSAC clubs.
Yeah.
And the closest one to me was Osnabrück. The club was called Osnabrück Dolphins. I managed to come across one of the guys that was within my squadron, a lad called Cy McNamara. He introduced me to the club. In the club were two guys who were sat in a corner, and I was quite apprehensive as I walked in, to start off with. A lad called Dave Fear and a lad called Chris Miles.
To me, name that Fear.
Yeah, Dave Fear, yeah. Who is actually one of the mildest-mannered individuals you'll probably ever come across. Both of those two individuals were instrumental in kind of kicking me off as far as, being keen and just wanted to learn more and so on and so on. Chris emigrated to Australia eventually, and I still very good friends with Dave, albeit that, usual thing, you kind of lose touch over a period of time. But again, both of those two, had me diving pretty much every weekend. I progressed very quickly to sports diver, and then again through to dive leader and advanced diver. And some people probably out there would turn around and say, I was badge collecting. But I wasn't. I really wasn't. I mean, these guys were really putting me through my paces. There was no nepotism at all when it come to doing the exams, for each level I did. There was no easy street, when it came to doing the rescue skills and so on and so on. They really put me through my paces on each and every part. But I think the desire and everything else to want to learn more, just like you, in exactly the same way as you are now, the desire to want to learn more, the desire to want to be better as a diver and to better myself, as a diver, I followed on top of that with these two guys who were saying, Steve, you need to do this, right, sort this out, do that, do this, and then the next minute I'm involved in wider aspects of the club's activities. And the next minute I'm assisting in teaching, and then they're sending me off on my assistant instructor's course. And then one day I walked in, and Chris had actually gone away and booked me onto my military dive supervisor's course. The fly sod had been in contact, all right, with my regiment, and spoken to my squadron leader and said, look, I've got this course that I really would like. At the time then I was a warrant officer, squadron sergeant major, and he said, I've got a course I'd like, warrant officer Kirkman to go on the course. He says, he did release it. Well, the boss at the time was great, and he released me. I went off on the what they call the pre-SADS course at the time, where you go away for a week, you kind of do the assessments and so on. And by that stage, I hadn't really been diving very long, Andy. I'd kind of, like you say, I'd progressed up to this advanced diver fairly rapidly, and I had quite a few doubts about my own experience, my own level of understanding, and so on and so on. And then I went down on the pre-SADS course, and of course, usual thing. First thing is start off on the right hand side. Okay, introduce yourself, who you were, how many dives you've done, where you've dived, and so on and so on. And I was sat at the back, sheepish, crapping myself, thinking, they're all going to come out with, I've done 12,000 million dives. I've dived everywhere, including the moon, and so on and so on. And I'm listening to all these guys, I've been diving for 15 years, and I've done 250 dives. I'm going, what? And by this stage, I'd done 350 dives, just all over the place, and I'd been diving in lots of different countries by that stage, you know what I mean? So military expeditions and all that stuff. And I suddenly realised that because of that club environment over in Germany and going out all the time on the boats in the Baltic Sea, my boat handling skills, my understanding of charts, tides, tables, and so on and so on, the dive planning, search recovery, and everything else that's encompassed all within that dive supervisor's piece. In actual fact, I was in a pretty good position. So I ended up doing the pre-SADs. And unfortunately, the way it works is, getting onto the SADS assessment is quite difficult. The pre-SADS is a very good stepping stone, because if you're identified on the pre-SADS as having kind of the right temperament, the knowledge, and experience, that type of stuff, you stand a good chance of being invited back on a course on a SADS assessment if somebody drops out. A few months later, which then it was actually about 3 or 4 weeks before I was due to take over as regimental sergeant major, so my next and final promotion as a soldier. They phoned me up and they said, look, we've had somebody drop out on the SADS assessment. Would you like to come down and do it? I went up to see my commanding officer, and he said, yeah, do one, go and do it. So 24 hours later, I was down at Bobby Sands and sitting a 4-hour exam, going through, various BSAC advanced diver. I'll refer to them advanced diver plus papers, and your dive tables and so on. And that was the first day on a Sunday afternoon. I thought it was a pretty nails course, where you're constantly being assessed. Even on an evening time after the diving is finished, it was not uncommon for one of the diving instructors to come in and to play up as if they had a sore shoulder, and the next minute, and they're just seeing if the reaction of the person that was the supervisor at the time of the dive that day reacts, and suddenly goes, that could be a bend, and reacting to it, and so on and so on. So you were constantly on your toes, from Sunday afternoon to Friday after you'd been in with the chief instructor to tell you whether you'd passed or failed. You know what I mean? Quite nails, but usually fantastic course. There's a lot of people, out there, and I don't think diving's unique, in that people will, in some cases, advance rapidly, in the sporting activity or the recreational activity that they've chosen to participate in, and there could be a multitude of reasons behind that. And I don't think we should always look at somebody as the badge collecting, because if I use by way as a hypothetical example, if you have a person, right, that has learned to dive in Fuerteventura, say, for example, right, and they've done several thousand dives in Fuerteventura, up in the north of the island, right, where the depths, are fairly shallow, all right, the currents are pretty much non-existent, and they've used the same 3, 4, 5 dive sites over and over and over and over and over again. are they more experienced in that 5,000 dives than the person that's done 200 dives, who's dived in places such as, the North Sea, Scapa 4, over in Canada, in Newfoundland, all right, off the coast of Crete, in the Red Sea, been on holiday to Mauritius, so I'm mentioning all these Gucci places, but each one of those has different topography underwater, different sea conditions. You know what I mean? Therefore, you're revising the equipment that you're diving on. You're revising, your risk, and so on and so on. So, is that person actually got more diving experience than the person that's done 5,000 dives? Because the person that's done 5,000 dives just knows how to put the same kit on every single day, doing the same diving activity in the same conditions, with the same risk, blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Again, it all comes down to personal opinion, but I would suggest that the person that's got that breadth of knowledge from diving in a multitude of places, whether it be freshwater lakes, whether it be the ocean, whether it be the North Sea, north or south, we all know that the currents, for example, off the northeast coast from Newcastle upwards, St. Abbs, and so on, and out of Eyemouth and this, the currents are extremely strong. If we're talking about from like an instructor, a mentoring type position, as is the dive supervisors, military dive supervisors, then you are looking for somebody who has a broad breadth of experience, in a multitude of different areas within diving, recreational diving. And therefore, if you are that person that has possibly only ever dived in a quarry, then your breadth of experience in this may not carry you through the course.
Yeah, totally.
In that respect. If, say, for example, let's just have a look at the BSAC Advanced Diver syllabus. It's quite extensive, you know what I mean? There's a lot to it. It takes quite a long period of time nowadays, to get through that syllabus, unless you're fortunate to be in an extremely active club, you know what I mean, that allows you to get through it. Again, going back to that individual who just wants to, dive, in the local quarry, it makes it easy. Maybe the budget isn't so great. Maybe they can't afford to go on the fantastic holidays, that they do. But I don't think we should necessarily undermine the love of the sport and and the participation in it. That advanced diver piece. If we were to move that advanced diver piece into going onto a course, pass or fail at the end of it, then you wouldn't go and attend that course, would you? Unless you really met the criteria before going on it. The club isn't like that. The club is that you progress through the advanced diver syllabus progressively within that club environment, and at the end of it, which could be 10 weeks, it could be 10 months, it could be 3 or 4 years. All again depends on the individual's commitment and effort, the commitment and effort from the club, the moon and the sun coming into alignment with Venus, and all sorts of crap like that, you know what I mean? All decide on the speed in which people, get through the diving, the diving piece. But I think a lot of it is down to the individual's determination to push.
Well, that's a good lead on to my next question. And so I've noticed you have an ability, whether it's an affinity or a sixth sense or whatever, but you can kind of get into the psyche perhaps of the person you're instructing, training, whether you're good at body language or you just know, I don't know what it is, but you seem to get a feel for the person you're training and put them very much at ease.
Yeah, thank you.
How do you do that so naturally? Is it natural for you, or is it something you picked up? Or do you not even know you do it?
Well, I think I don't even know I'm doing it. But yeah, I mean, I've been an instructor not just within diving, but in certain other fields, throughout my entire life. Instruction is something that I really enjoy. There are certain topics and certain types of things that I prefer to teach. But I think one of the things that I really do really enjoy is mentoring in a sense that rather than doing it as a formal lesson, formal education in the classroom environment and so on. But I really enjoy doing the mentoring piece, where like we are now, just shooting the shit. If we were together at the dive site, giving tips, helping out, and so on. And then when I think one of the things when it comes down to that piece where you say you have that sixth sense of knowing the divers, I think I think I think I'm really quick at being able to pick up on people's anxiety. You know what I mean? And the nervousness prior to going in the water, the nervousness in the water, and so on and so on. There are times when individuals, get into a position where they're not particularly comfortable, and all you've got to do is grab hold of that person's hand. You know what I mean? Now, on the surface, to the men amongst us in this stand here, that might seem a bit pansy. You know what I mean? And not the done thing, all right? But in the water, just grabbing hold of somebody's hand, you know what I mean? It's almost an instant relief, of relaxation, because now you know that you're not on your own. You know what I mean? Somebody is there to help sort out the issue or the problem, whatever the case may be. You're not lost, and what have you. And it's just little things like that.
It's funny that I remember being at around 50 meters on my TDI course with you, and looking at my slate and going, I must have been knocked off my tits, and all I got was a fucking punch. It wasn't a hand on the shoulder. Come on, get on with it. And I'm like, oh yeah, get me DSMB, whatever it was. So you can put your hand on me any time if it's not a punch next time.
Well, I think it all depends on the level of training and whatever it is you're doing. You know what I mean? And I'm quite confident if I'd have sensed that there was an element of stress, because in diving, you as well as Andy, that incident pit, it doesn't take a lot, and it doesn't take depth, all right, for it to be in that incident pit, to suddenly things to go pear-shaped and then panic set in. You do not have to be at 50 meters. You only have, you can be 6 meters underwater, 3 meters underwater, but as soon as something isn't quite right, getting tangled in a net, your gas consumption just about getting down, where it shouldn't be. I'll use the word where it shouldn't be rather than, as per your rule of thirds, and so on and so on. It's the ability to be able to identify that, not just in yourself, but in others, I think is what helps you be on top of, other people being able to help. And maybe it is that, maybe that sixth sense is what you say I've got, which I don't really notice, in all honesty. It just kind of comes naturally. Whether or not that is also part of my ex-military background and
putting into diving, perhaps, isn't it, as well? You've got quite a few years of diving experience to be able to recognise those signals. One of the first things I noticed when I came out to Forteventura was the crack. So come out and I'll show you how to sort your kit out. So I turned up my brand new BCD. I paid about £350 for it. I thought it was flipping brilliant. I had my strobe light on here because everyone in the club had one. And I had some regs that were just perhaps not up to par. And the first thing you went, that needs to go on eBay. That needs to go in the bin. That just fucking leave here. So obviously the crack settles some people like me down, and other people it makes slightly nervous, but I guess you gauge that. And obviously to make people not only follow your enthusiasm in an infectious way, but your ability certainly made me want to be a better me, or a better diver, not necessarily the best one or better than that person there, just me be better at me. So we know about your inspirations now and your mentors, and now you like mentoring. What's it like to be an inspiration? Do you feel like you inspire people?
I don't really look at it like that, Andy. You know what I mean? It's it's like say if let's use you as the example, or even Moz, our good friend. I turned up, at my one of my previous places of work in Nottingham. Our good friend Moz, right, was there. He was a BSAC advanced diver. He was diving on a twin set, and so on and so on. He was extremely keen as mustard. He wanted to come diving. I explained to him that I was a person who loved to talk about diving, but I actually liked diving better, right? So, and there are so many people like talking about diving, but they don't go diving. You know what I mean? I just want to go diving, and then talk about it whilst we're doing it, and so on and so on. So, anyways, I managed to persuade him to come diving. I then phoned up my good friend Martin Redfern to come the same day. Another lad turned up, and it just so happened that Martin Redfern took to the dive site before I did, and he was looking at Mozzy's kit, and he says, "Has Steve seen this kit yet?" He said, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "Has he said anything?" He said, "No, why?" He said he was going to show us some things and this that. Yeah. said, all right, because you have got an open mind, haven't you? And he said, mine. He said, no, just solemnly say, just keep an open mind. So we got there, and we went on the first dive. He couldn't reach the valves to do his shutdown drills, and and a multitude of other things. Pipes were in the way, and so on and so on. So when we got out, doing it in a or should I say, a tactical manner, although he pretends it wasn't. I said, right, obviously you're having problems, getting to your valves, and if you're diving to insect, you need to be able to do the shutdown drills. No questions. You need to be able to do the shutdown drills. So what we need to do is have a look at where the cylinders are in relation to your body. All right, are they too far down? Are they too far forward? You know what I mean? Are they too far apart? In other words, are the cylinder bands and what have you pushing the cylinders too far apart that he can't actually push his arms out to get to the valves and so on. So we had a look at all the configuration, and then went back in, still couldn't get to them. All right, come back out, and I said, right, so you're happy now for a little bit more advice, and we'll do the fine tuning and stuff. Yeah. So I then said to Red, get the toolbox. Red came across with the toolbox. Said, right, you need to cut this, snip that, do this, do that. And as I was doing it all, there was this pile of diving equipment just piling up beside his kit, as I was getting rid of all the peripheral crap, right, that he just did not need. You know what I mean? And if that sounds like I'm bigging myself up as something, it's not, because that's what happened to me when Guy Wallace took me. You know what I mean? On my cave diving course. You know what I mean? And he trimmed everything down. Why do you need that? Well, because I did. Yeah, but why do you need it? And I couldn't give good enough explanations as to the reason why. We'll get it off then. Put it on eBay. Get rid of this, get rid of that. So I just did exactly the same with Moz, because somebody had taught me previously. So I kind of enjoyed that particular aspect of mentoring other people, getting across to them as much of my knowledge that I've learned from others. Because, there's an old saying that I used to have at one of the military schools where I used to teach. The knowledge that you learn today is not yours to keep. It's yours to share with others. You know what I mean? And if you're a mentor, then that's the mindset you need to be in. You know what I mean? Too many people, all right, like to hold on to information as if it's precious. It puts them in a position of power. I'm not interested in that. You know what I mean? I want people to know everything that I know about my love for the sport and what I've learned from others people. You know what I mean? So many people, that I've learned many things from in diving. Why do I want to keep it to myself? And if that is what makes me an inspiration, then so be it. But I never look at it like that. I look at it as just the desire to want to help my friends, who also come into sport, tell them as much as I know about diving, hand across to them all the skills that I've learned and why we do this and why we do that skill. The mentality behind it, the thought process, the ethos, whatever it might be, all those buzzwords. To me, the BSAC is a fantastic organisation for learning to dive. So when we're talking, one of the bonuses and the pluses I think the BSAC has as a club environment is because when I turn up at the club and I want to become that ocean diver, right, the first person I look at is the person that's teaching me. They are the initial mentor in my diving, and that's all because it's all to start off with. It's in the classroom, it's then in the swimming pool, and so on and so on. And then eventually, you know what I mean, I grow wings, right, and I'm allowed to go out into the open water. I do the brief in this day, but because I'm not the only person that's of significance in the club at that particular time, you know what I mean, there's other diving taking place. And whilst I'm sat on the surface, all right, eating my chip butty, you know what I mean, or my sausage butty, or my bacon butty, depending on which inland dive site I'm at the time, possibly, right? I've got Bob who's talking to me about, what's going on the water, and why that bloke who's walking down to water is wearing that and what that is, and why that's not necessarily a good idea, right? Because Bob, right, is actually a first class diver. And I'm getting all that instruction and all that knowledge from him free of charge within the club, rather than paying for a skill development course with another diving organisation. By the time I become that ocean diver, the first ladder on the BSAC ladder of diving, I'm actually quite a lot more. I've got quite a lot more than what's just in that syllabus.
Yeah.
Simply because I'm in that club environment. And then all those people that have got that plethora of experience are all passing that on to me, right, free of charge. And then as I get further up the ladder, I then realise that some of the information that some of them have been telling me, right, in my newfound opinion, through my own experience, etc., was fantastic advice, and I'll keep that with me as I progress forward. But do you understand what I mean? That's why I think the BSAC, that club environment of the BSAC, is brilliant. Of course, as you know, within the BSAC as well, as you move up the ladder at the advanced diver level, and then you're moving across on, to, depending if you're open water instructor or advanced instructor or whatever it is, you're kind of taught within that instructor program that when you are out on the boat, every opportunity is a training opportunity, you know what I mean? But you're doing it informally, and therefore it becomes more of a mentorship than a formal instruction piece. I remember years ago, the first time I went out into the Baltic Sea, going out from the military diving centre up at Kiel, and we're going out 3 boats, going out into the Baltic. And for me, I was still a relatively slight new diver. I think I'd got maybe to sports dive at that particular point, in an inland lake, right, in called Hemmo in North Germany near Cuxhaven. Now I'm going diving in the open water in the sea, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm now going to go in the sea, and I'm going to see all sorts of stuff. It's going to be fantastic, and blah blah blah. And on the way out, I remember the SADS, Dave Fear, turning around saying, "Oh, do you fancy having a drive of the boat, Steve?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, go." And he's now teaching me all about the boat handling, and I'm going along, and he says, "Right, obviously, Steve, the bow, the port side, the starboard side, the stern, and so on and so on." He's teaching me about the, all the controls and all that type of stuff. And I'm going like, "So, see that marker over there, Steve?" He says, "That's called a cardinal marker because it's got these 2 shapes. All right, that means it's like the furthest to the east or to the west. That's a northern cardinal marker. Right, that's a port side marker. That's a starboard marker, boy." And I'm just constantly being bombarded with information. Oh, there's a cumulus and imbibe again. Cloud in the stern. And I'm going, yeah, it's been fantastic, mate. Nearly falling asleep at the wheel on the boat. But, and it was just constantly like that, all the time. And then we get to the dive site, and I'm learning how to steady the boat, you know what I mean, as we're doing the sweep to try and find the wreck, you know what I mean. And what we do is the words of command in order to shove over the shot line, and, you know what I mean, so it's done in a manner and everyone understands what their part in it is, and just so on and so on. And I came back from that first day of diving in the sea, you know what I mean, having driven a boat, having been involved in putting shot lines in, grappling, all right, for wrecks because we didn't have an echo sounder, but we had, bearings and transits and so on and so on. And I come back from that day's diving, and my brain was exhausted, all right, with the amount of things that had been shoved in through my ears that day, but absolutely fantastic. And it was just like that every time I went out. All these people trying to mentor me, another guy who is a good inspiration as well, with a guy called Kev Holmes, now a national instructor, based still out in Germany. His manner and his way of teaching and getting stuff across to you and this was fantastic. And I just like a sponge, just like you are now, just a sponge wanting to learn more and more and more. I wanted to know the ins and outs of the fat about everything that we're doing, that BSAC, yeah, and that's what's great about the club. And notwithstanding, of course, that one we always talk about, because it's a diving organisation that teaches its divers how to take themselves diving rather than being taken diving, all right, by a dive master or an instructor, at some diving centre on holiday or in case maybe.
So that brings us to an end of episode 1 with my friend, mentor and instructor, Steve Kirkman. Links to all the things we discussed are in the podcast notes. On episode 2, me and Steve continue the conversation where we expand into the technical and cave diving arena and talk about his new SF2 rebreather. You've been listening to Are You a Scuba Diver Fancy a Brew podcast with me, Andy the Northern Diver. You can find more scuba related content on my YouTube channel. The link is in the podcast notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review. If there's someone or something you'd like us to discuss, then let us know via our Facebook page. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.